In this video, we're not just citing data. We're traveling across the United States to 10 cities where water shortages are no longer theoretical. These communities are growing rapidly, even as their lakes, rivers, and aquifers shrink. In many cases, leaders have softened the message, worried about what public panic might do. We'll look at the numbers, the legal fights over water, and the restrictions already taking hold. Stay with us, because the city at the top of our list has already done the unthinkable. It stopped new home construction because the water simply isn't there. This isn't a future scenario. It's happening now. If your city could be at risk, tell us in the comments. And if you value deep, independent analysis like this, consider liking and subscribing. Let's get started. Number 10. Miami. We're kicking off our journey in a city that feels almost ironic at first glance. Miami, Florida. Everywhere you look, there's water. The vast Atlantic Ocean stretches out on one side, and Biscayne Bay borders the other. With that much blue on the map, you'd assume water scarcity would be the last thing this city has to worry about. But here's the twist. The problem isn't that there isn't enough water. It's that the wrong kind is taking over. Nearly 3 million residents rely on a single lifeline for drinking water, the Biscayne Aquifer. This enormous, shallow layer of porous limestone beneath the ground acts like a natural reservoir, storing rainwater that seeps down over time. For decades, it has quietly sustained the region, but now rising seas are changing the equation. As ocean levels climb, a steady, invisible wedge of saltwater is creeping inland beneath the surface. This process, known as saltwater intrusion, is steadily corrupting the aquifer from below. And once salt contaminates freshwater underground, there's no simple way to reverse it. According to data from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the boundary line marking this saltwater advance is moving faster than experts initially forecast. In certain areas, it has already pushed several miles inland, far beyond earlier projections. The United States Army Corps of Engineers is now scrambling to slow the damage, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into emergency measures. They're constructing subterranean barriers and injecting freshwater back into the aquifer in an attempt to stall the encroachment. It's essentially a high-stakes holding action against the ocean itself. Meanwhile, projections from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration estimate that sea levels around Miami could rise by as much as 2 feet by 2050. If that happens, the pace of contamination will only accelerate, making today's concerns look mild by comparison. Experts at the University of Miami have warned that adapting to this new reality, or even considering a managed retreat from the most vulnerable areas, could cost billions of dollars in infrastructure upgrades and long-term planning. So here's the uncomfortable question. When your only dependable source of drinking water is slowly being overtaken by the sea, how sustainable is a real estate market built on luxury waterfront living and multi-million-dollar coastal homes? The real bubble in Miami may not just be property values. It's the confidence that engineering alone can outmaneuver environmental limits. And if that confidence cracks, the economic consequences could be severe. Number 9. Atlanta. We're moving inland now, leaving the coastline behind and heading north to Atlanta, Georgia, the sprawling capital often considered the economic heart of the South. Unlike Miami, Atlanta isn't battling the ocean. Its struggle is far more political and just as intense. The real conflict here lies with neighboring states. For years, Atlanta has been at the center of one of the longest and most expensive water disputes in American history, widely known as the Tri-State Water Wars. At the core of the fight is a shared river network, the Apalachicola-Chattahoochee-Flint River Basin, often shortened to the ACF Basin. This interconnected system supplies water to Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, and everyone wants a bigger slice of it. Atlanta depends heavily on Lake Lanier, a massive reservoir within that basin that serves as the city's primary water source. But as the metro population has surged, critics in Alabama and Florida have accused Georgia of drawing more than its fair share. During recent drought periods, water levels at Lake Lanier plunged to alarming historic lows. As the shoreline receded, eerie reminders of the past emerged: old roadways, building foundations, and remnants of entire communities that were flooded decades ago when the lake was created. It was a stark visual warning of how fragile the system really is. And the pressure isn't easing anytime soon. The Atlanta Regional Commission estimates that the metropolitan area could add another 2.9 million residents by 2050. That kind of growth raises an obvious question. Where exactly will the additional water supply come from? Florida maintains that Atlanta's upstream consumption has devastated the oyster fisheries in Apalachicola Bay, crippling a once thriving industry. Alabama argues that limited water access is choking off its own economic expansion. The dispute has escalated so dramatically that the Supreme Court of the United States has repeatedly stepped in to weigh the competing claims. Collectively, the states have spent more than $100 million in legal fees alone. That's not a long-term strategy. It's a standoff balanced on uncertainty. According to research from the World Wildlife Fund, Atlanta ranks among the most water-stressed major cities globally. That's not a distinction any fast-growing metro area wants. If a future Supreme Court ruling forces Georgia to significantly scale back its withdrawals from Lake Lanier, or if a prolonged drought pushes the system to its breaking point, the economic consequences for Atlanta could be immediate and severe. Growth would stall. Construction would slow. Developers could face strict limits or even moratoriums on new water connections, effectively freezing expansion. So the real question becomes, can Atlanta continue its rapid rise under these constraints, or is it building momentum on a fragile foundation? Number 8. Denver. Now we head farther west, straight into the dry, high-altitude core of the country. Welcome to Denver, Colorado, better known as the Mile High City. Perched at the edge of the Rocky Mountains, Denver has spent more than a century expanding on the back of a bold and ambitious strategy. Capture the snowmelt from the mountain's western slopes and redirect it eastward to support life on the much drier plains. For decades, that approach worked. But it hinged on one crucial artery, the Colorado River. Today, Denver and many of its surrounding suburbs draw over half of their total water supply from the Colorado River basin. And here's the uncomfortable reality. That river is under extraordinary strain. Sustained by mountain snowpack that has steadily diminished over the past 20 years during a historic megadrought, the river no longer produces enough flow to reliably serve the 40 million Americans who rely on it. According to findings from the National Snow and Ice Data Center, the spring snowpack, which essentially acts as the river's natural storage system, has shown a persistent downward trend. Less snow means less runoff. And less runoff means shrinking reservoirs throughout the Southwest. In response, the United States Bureau of Reclamation has issued unprecedented Tier 1, Tier 2, and even Tier 3 shortage declarations on the Colorado River, triggering mandatory water cuts across multiple states. That's something that would have been almost unthinkable a generation ago. Denver's municipal provider, Denver Water, does hold some of the oldest and strongest water rights on the river. On paper, that's a powerful position, but legal priority doesn't help much if the river itself keeps shrinking. You can't claim water that simply isn't there. In anticipation of worsening dry cycles, Denver Water is investing more than $500 million to enlarge Gross Reservoir. The goal is straightforward. Capture and store more water during wet years to create a buffer against the inevitable dry ones. It's a strategic gamble. Build up reserves now and hope variability doesn't turn into permanence. But what happens if dry years stop being the exception and start becoming the baseline? Meanwhile, Denver's population has ballooned, and home prices have nearly doubled over the past decade. The city feels prosperous, energetic, unstoppable. Yet beneath that growth is a heavy dependence on a single, increasingly unreliable river system. In many ways, Denver's housing market is anchored to climate conditions that no longer resemble the past century. The assumptions that fueled its rise may not hold in the decades ahead. Number 7. Austin. We've made our way to Austin, Texas, a city that's been exploding in growth and transforming into a major tech powerhouse. Corporate heavyweights like Tesla and Oracle have planted serious roots here, helping fuel its rapid expansion. On the surface, Austin doesn't look water-stressed at all. The Colorado River, and yes, this is Texas's Colorado River, not the massive one out west, runs right through the heart of downtown, giving the city that vibrant waterfront appeal. But here's what most people don't realize. The picturesque lakes that define the area, Lake Travis and Lake Buchanan, aren't natural, stable lakes. They're man-made reservoirs. Their water levels rise and fall depending on rainfall, inflows, and usage. And at the moment, they're dropping fast. The Lower Colorado River Authority, which oversees the system, reports that the combined storage of these reservoirs has fallen below 35%. That's not a small dip. That's a serious warning sign. Recent images tell the story in stark detail. Luxury waterfront mansions once perched above deep blue water now overlook wide stretches of exposed rock and dry canyon floor. Private boat docks that used to float gently on the surface are stranded far from the shoreline, sometimes hundreds of feet away. What was once prime waterfront property suddenly feels a lot less connected to water. The region hasn't caught a break from the weather either. Last summer brought relentless, record-setting heat. Austin endured more than 45 straight days with temperatures climbing above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, smashing previous records. That kind of sustained heat does two things at once. It accelerates evaporation from already depleted reservoirs and dramatically increases water use as residents try to keep lawns green and pools filled. In response, the city enacted Stage 2 drought restrictions, limiting outdoor landscape watering to once per week. But let's be honest, that's a temporary measure. It barely scratches the surface of the larger issue. The deeper challenge is growth. Austin has been one of the fastest-growing large metropolitan areas in the United States. And according to research from Texas A&M University, if the region experiences a severe drought comparable to the devastating one in the 1950s, the city's water supply could reach a critical breaking point within the next decade. You can't sustain record-breaking population growth while your primary reservoirs sit at barely one-third capacity. The numbers simply don't add up. In many ways, Austin's drought-driven housing bubble is deflating in real time. Waterfront property values in some communities are already feeling the pressure as buyers grow more cautious. Number 6. San Antonio. Heading south from Austin, we arrive in San Antonio, a city dealing with a very different kind of water crisis, one you can't see from the shoreline because there isn't one. Unlike its neighbor, San Antonio doesn't depend on surface reservoirs. Instead, more than 90% of its supply is pulled from deep below ground. The city rests atop the Edwards Aquifer, an enormous underground water system stored within porous limestone. For decades, this aquifer was viewed as a blessing, delivering exceptionally clean, dependable water and supporting steady growth. But that growth has accelerated dramatically. San Antonio has ranked among the fastest-growing cities in the country, and that surge in population is placing enormous strain on the aquifer. Water is being extracted more quickly than natural rainfall can replenish it. The Edwards Aquifer Authority oversees the system and monitors its levels closely. When water measurements at a key monitoring well drop below specific thresholds, automatic conservation stages are triggered. The city has already entered Stage 4 restrictions, which impose strict limits on non-essential water use. Data from the United States Geological Survey shows a troubling downward trend in aquifer levels. And the stakes go far beyond residential lawns. The aquifer feeds iconic natural springs such as Como Springs and San Marcos Springs. If water levels fall too low, those springs could slow dramatically or even run dry, threatening endangered species and dealing a severe blow to the region's recreation and tourism industries. City officials are scrambling to reduce reliance on a single underground source. Billions of dollars are being invested in diversification projects, including a roughly 150-mile pipeline designed to draw water from another distant aquifer. But importing groundwater from afar doesn't come cheap. The higher costs are translating into significant rate increases for residents. When the value of your home depends almost entirely on an unseen water supply, and that supply is being pushed to its limits, you're operating on borrowed time. Number 5. Salt Lake City. Our journey now takes us to Salt Lake City, Utah, a place whose very name hints at the crisis unfolding there. Looming beside the metro area is the Great Salt Lake, the largest saltwater lake in the Western Hemisphere. And right now, it's vanishing. For decades, the rivers that naturally replenish the lake, the Bear River, Weber River, and Jordan River, have been heavily diverted to support agriculture and the rapidly expanding Salt Lake metro population. Add in the pressures of a prolonged megadrought, and the result is staggering. The lake is receding at a pace scientists describe as unprecedented. Data from the United States Geological Survey shows that the Great Salt Lake has lost more than 70% of its water volume. Compared to what it looked like half a century ago, it's now only a shadow of its former size. That dramatic shrinkage triggers two separate but deeply connected emergencies. The first is straightforward: water scarcity. The collapsing lake reflects a broader regional shortage that has already forced strict conservation rules and tough trade-offs. There simply isn't enough water to go around. The second crisis is even more alarming. What's being exposed as the shoreline retreats isn't just harmless sediment. The dry lake bed contains decades of accumulated industrial pollution, arsenic, mercury, lead, and other hazardous materials embedded in the soil. As the surface dries and hardens, strong winds lift that contaminated dust into the air and carry it straight toward populated areas. The Utah Department of Environmental Quality has issued repeated air quality alerts tied to this toxic dust. Health experts warn that prolonged exposure can increase the risk of respiratory illnesses, certain cancers, and neurological damage. In other words, this isn't just about dwindling water levels anymore. It's about the air residents breathe every day. State leaders are scrambling. Lawmakers have approved emergency measures and committed more than $1 billion in an effort to restore water flow to the lake. But many scientists argue that the response may be arriving far too late to reverse the long-term trajectory. It raises a difficult question. How does a housing market remain stable in a region where drinking water is increasingly scarce and airborne toxins are a growing threat? Number 4. Los Angeles. Now we arrive in the state that has come to symbolize America's modern water emergency, California. Our first stop is Los Angeles, a sprawling, sun-soaked metropolis that rises out of what is, at its core, desert terrain. Los Angeles is often described as glamorous and unstoppable, but in reality, it's a carefully engineered mirage sustained by imported water. Nearly 12 million people live in this greater metro area. Yet by natural standards, a city of this scale was never meant to thrive in such an arid environment. Its survival has always depended on reaching far beyond its own borders. For more than a century, LA has drawn water from hundreds of miles away through two main supply lines: the California State Water Project, which channels water south from Northern California, and the Colorado River Aqueduct, which taps into the struggling Colorado River system. Both of these critical sources are under immense pressure. The State Water Project relies heavily on snowpack in the Sierra Nevada. But in recent years, allocations have dropped to as little as 5% of what agencies originally requested. When winter snowfall is sparse, there's simply not enough meltwater to distribute. And as we saw earlier, the Colorado River is already stretched to its limits. The Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, which provides imported water to Los Angeles and surrounding areas, has seen its Colorado River allotment reduced by hundreds of thousands of acre-feet. In an unprecedented move, the agency declared a formal water shortage emergency for the first time in its history. That decision forced nearly 6 million residents to limit outdoor watering to just 1 day per week. According to city data, Los Angeles imports roughly 85% of its water supply. Let that sink in. The vast multi-trillion-dollar housing market, luxury estates, high-rise condos, suburban developments, is fundamentally tied to a distribution network that is now deeply strained. City leaders are racing to modernize the system, pouring billions into wastewater recycling plants, groundwater replenishment, and stormwater capture projects. But many of these initiatives are years, if not decades, behind where they need to be to fully offset declining imports. For generations, homeowners and investors operated under one quiet assumption: the water would always be there. That assumption is beginning to crack. Number 3. San Diego. We continue south until we quite literally reach the end of the pipeline: San Diego, California. If Los Angeles is walking a tightrope, San Diego is hanging on by a thread. This city is even more dependent on outside water than LA. Nearly 90% of San Diego's supply is imported. Local sources contribute very little, leaving the region heavily reliant on the most disputed and overextended river system in America, the Colorado River. And here's where it gets even more precarious. San Diego holds some of the most junior water rights on the river. In practical terms, that means when mandatory cuts are issued during shortages, San Diego is among the first to feel the reduction. Senior rights holders upstream get priority. Everyone else waits and hopes. Fully aware of this vulnerability, the San Diego County Water Authority decided to take a bold, expensive gamble. The agency invested more than $1 billion to construct the Claude. This facility converts seawater from the Pacific Ocean into potable drinking water. When it opened, it was celebrated as a breakthrough, a drought-resistant solution that would shield the region from uncertainty. But that insurance policy comes with a steep price tag. Desalination requires enormous amounts of energy, making the water it produces significantly more expensive than traditional imported supplies. In fact, the cost of this so-called drought-proof water is nearly double that of standard imports. Those higher costs don't just disappear, they show up directly on residents' utility bills. Today, San Diego homeowners face some of the highest water rates in the country. Meanwhile, housing affordability is already stretched thin. Data from the San Diego Association of Realtors indicates that affordability has dropped to historic lows. Add sharply rising water bills into that equation, and thousands of households could find themselves financially squeezed even further. And here's the hard truth. Despite the billion-dollar investment, the desalination plant only provides about 10% of the region's total water demand. It's a significant achievement, but it doesn't fundamentally solve the dependency problem. San Diego has effectively spent a fortune on a safety net that covers just a fraction of its exposure. The city remains overwhelmingly dependent on the declining Colorado River system. This isn't a challenge with a quick or painless solution. Number 2. Las Vegas. Now we arrive at the city that has become the face of America's megadrought, Las Vegas, Nevada. In many ways, no other place captures the stakes quite like this one. More than 90% of Las Vegas's water supply comes from a single source, Lake Mead, the enormous reservoir formed by Hoover Dam. And right now, that reservoir is shrinking to levels that would have once seemed unimaginable. If you've seen photos of Lake Mead recently, you've probably noticed the stark white bathtub ring etched into the canyon walls. That mineral-stained rock marks how high the water used to sit. In some areas, that line towers more than 100 feet above the current surface. It's a visual reminder of just how far the lake has fallen. Data from the United States Bureau of Reclamation shows the reservoir hovering at or below 28% of capacity. At one point, water levels dropped so dramatically that the city's original intake pipe, installed back in the 1970s, was left high and dry, protruding uselessly from an exposed hillside. That crisis forced the Southern Nevada Water Authority to undertake a massive engineering project. They invested more than $1.5 billion to construct what's known as the third straw, a deeper intake tunnel drilled beneath the lakebed to access the remaining water, even if levels fall further. It was a bold move, essentially buying the city more time. To its credit, Las Vegas has implemented aggressive conservation policies. Decorative grass has been banned in many areas, and homeowners are offered financial incentives to rip out thirsty lawns and replace them with desert landscaping. These measures have significantly reduced per capita water use. But conservation alone cannot refill a shrinking reservoir. The federal government has now declared a Tier 3 shortage across the lower Colorado River basin, requiring Nevada to accept substantial cuts to its allocation. And despite all the efficiency gains, the reality remains. Las Vegas depends almost entirely on a lake that continues to decline. The city's economy, its casinos, elaborate fountains, luxury resorts, millions of annual visitors, and red-hot housing market is all anchored to a rapidly diminishing water supply. For now, growth continues. Construction cranes still dot the skyline. But underlying it all is a fragile hope that wetter years might return. As one climate scientist at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas bluntly stated, "Hope is not a water management strategy." Number 1. Phoenix. We've reached the final destination on this journey, and without question, the most alarming. Phoenix, Arizona. This is where the warnings stop sounding theoretical and start becoming reality. Like Las Vegas and parts of California, Phoenix has relied heavily on the Colorado River. Much of that supply is transported through the 300-mile Central Arizona Project Canal System, an engineering lifeline that made large-scale desert development possible. But Arizona was among the first states to see its Colorado River allocation slashed to near-zero levels under federal shortage declarations. For all practical purposes, that primary pipeline is running on fumes. For years, the fallback strategy was groundwater. Builders pushed outward, creating vast suburban communities under the assumption that deeper wells could always be drilled if surface supplies tightened. Growth continued, fueled by that promise. Then came a stunning reversal. After conducting a decade-long assessment, the Arizona Department of Water Resources released findings that changed everything. Their conclusion: there isn't enough groundwater beneath the Phoenix metropolitan area to sustain the housing developments that have already received approval. The supply simply doesn't meet the state's requirement for a 100-year assured water source. In response, Arizona officials announced an immediate halt on new home construction in several outlying suburbs that could not demonstrate long-term water security. Let that sink in. This wasn't a slowdown or a minor regulatory tweak. It was a stop order driven by the absence of water. This marks a historic turning point. For the first time in modern U.S. history, a major metropolitan region has effectively restricted future housing growth because the water to support it does not exist. Research from the Kyle Center for Water Policy at Arizona State University estimates that more than 80,000 previously approved housing units are now in limbo. That represents billions of dollars in projected development suddenly thrown into uncertainty. If you purchased a home in one of these fast-growing outer communities, it raises a difficult question. What is that property truly worth if surrounding projects are frozen and long-term water reliability is in doubt? What happens if your own well eventually faces restrictions? Phoenix has become a warning sign, a real-time example of how water scarcity can directly collide with real estate expansion. It's the first major domino to tip. We've traveled from saltwater intrusion in Miami to airborne toxic dust near the Great Salt Lake, and now to construction bans in Phoenix. Across each stop, one theme has become impossible to ignore. Water availability is not a secondary concern in real estate. It may be the single most critical and most overlooked factor determining long-term home values. And these 10 cities are likely just the beginning. If you found this investigation meaningful, consider liking the video, sharing it with someone who should see it, and subscribing for more in-depth analysis. And we'd genuinely like to hear from you. Do you believe your city is doing enough to prepare for the growing water crisis?